Let's talk about some of the most common mistakes that people make when they're installing a floating LVP, vinyl, laminate, or wood floor. A floating floor is any time that you have a flooring system that is connected to itself but not connected to the structure around it. So oftentimes you're putting in a floor, in the case of a wood floor, that's tongue and groove glued to itself but not glued to the subfloor or the structure around it. A lot of times in the case of a vinyl floor or a laminate floor, there is a click lock locking mechanism that fastens all of the planks to themselves without having to glue it down or connect it to the larger structures. When I think about the issues that you can see with a floating floor, I think about them as symptoms and causes. So you can have a lot of symptoms. Those are the inconsistencies or problems that you see. And then you have causes, which is the underlying thing that is creating that symptom. You can have one cause that produces multiple symptoms. You can also have one symptom that is produced by different causes in a floor. So for instance, you might have a broken locking mechanism on an LVP or a vinyl floor. That's what you see that is wrong with the floor, but the cause is whatever's happening to the floor that produces that broken locking mechanism. There are 4 main mistakes that cause most of the symptoms you're going to see in a floating floor. By far the most common mistake that I see people make with a floating floor is that they anchor or pin it in place somewhere on the floor. The whole flooring system should not be connected to any part of the larger structure around it. Whenever you attach the floor in place, it limits the ability of some of the floor to move. So some of your floor will still shift, expand, and contract, and some of it is still being held in place. And you usually get one of two things. Either the floor as a whole shifts towards the part that's anchored, which means you get a hump in the floor, or it shifts away from the part that is anchored, which means it can pull apart and get separations in it. There are many different ways that a floor can get anchored or pinned in place that I've seen. Common ones are to install the floor under permanent fixtures like cabinets or built-ins, bathroom, permanent fixtures, things like that. Sometimes people will also mistakenly glue or nail the floor down in spots. This is especially common when you get to things like balconies or top steps where they want the floor to be even with a certain type of molding or be even with the edge of the floor. People can glue or nail the floor down along a last row or where it transitions to other flooring types like tile or things like that. Caulking will oftentimes also anchor a floor in place, especially if you caulk enough of the floor. So floating floors shouldn't be caulked to doorways or baseboards or things like that. In addition, anywhere that floor meets a vertical obstruction, whether it's tile or another flooring type, cabinets, walls, door casings, you should have the manufacturer's recommended expansion in those spots. Door casings are a particularly common area where people forget to or don't put in enough expansion. You have 2 rooms that move, shift, expand, and contract and grab onto the doorway. And you oftentimes can get separations in the doorway or buckling or humping in either one of the rooms. So the first thing you need to make sure and do if you're putting a floating floor in is make sure that that floor is not anchored, pinned in place, or held anywhere. And every spot of that floor is free to expand and contract and shift around within the manufacturer's guidelines. Another common issue that I see with floating floors, especially ones that have click lock locking mechanisms like vinyl floors or laminate floors, is too much vertical deflection in the floor. Vertical deflection is anytime the floor bounces up and down when you're walking on it or putting any sort of load on the floor. There can be a variety of reasons why a floor flexes too much underfoot. One of the common ones is that it's installed over a subfloor that is outside the manufacturer's tolerance for flatness. Anytime you have a subfloor with too severe peaks and valleys and you have your flooring system over that's spanning over hollow spots and valleys and running over humps, you can get too much flex in the flooring system. If that floor flexes too much over time, it can compromise the locking mechanisms, it can break them, and it can cause separations in the floor. Another thing that causes too much vertical deflection in the flooring is when an unapproved or extra underlayment is used under a product that is not designed for it. Oftentimes with an LVP vinyl or laminate click lock floating floor, there's already an integrated pad on the back of the board that allows for the proper amount of cushion underneath that flooring product. When you start to add additional underlayments, it causes too much softness and does not support that flooring enough. And you can start to see broken locking mechanisms, separations, and things like that. Another subfloor issue that might cause too much vertical movement would be a subfloor that's not structurally sound enough for the flooring you're putting over it. So this is oftentimes a wooden subfloor that flexes too much underfoot. So that's either a wooden subfloor that's too thin or not the right material, or goes over too large of a span so that when you walk on it, the subfloor bounces. A good rule of thumb is to not have a subfloor that bounces more than the flatness requirement for the product that you're installing. Another common mistake that I see is to not use the proper moisture abatement underneath the product you're installing. This is especially the case when you're installing over a concrete slab. Oftentimes you don't notice moisture problems until you've installed a floor over the slab, and moisture that was evaporating off now starts to build up underneath your floor. This is obviously a problem for wood floors and even products like laminate that have wood fiber in them. But it can even be a problem for LVP vinyl floors and floors that are billed as waterproof. Moisture that builds up underneath these products can cause the planks to deform and cup. Cupping is when the side of the board is higher than the middle of the board. Once a product is cupped and the edges are peaked up, oftentimes those edges will bounce up and down as you walk across them, and this can compromise the integrity of the locking mechanism connecting the planks. You'll oftentimes start to see chips or separations in the planks, or planks start to pop out altogether. Don't just assume that because you're using a plastic, vinyl, or LVP product that it is impervious to any sort of moisture issue, especially ones from a concrete subfloor. Oftentimes manufacturers require that you use a moisture barrier underneath those types of products, even if they're billed as waterproof. So make sure and read your manufacturer's guidelines and use an approved moisture barrier for that type of product. And the last common mistake that I see is just general installation damage or inattention to the product at the time of installation. This happens when somebody damages the product while they're installing it. They can either be hitting it too hard, forcing it together, hitting it directly with a mallet, or doing something that breaks it or breaks the locking mechanism, compromising the product itself. Oftentimes you don't even realize you're doing it at the time. I find with many floating floor systems, especially click lock floating floors like laminate floors and LVP floors, it's more about technique than force to try to get the product to go together. So if you're having to use a lot of force, or your installer or you are having to be rough with the product, likely something is wrong with the technique. Just paying attention to the product while you're installing it can go a long way to prevent damaged planks or planks with visual defects from making their way into the floor, which might necessitate future work and repairs being done to the floor. Many times planks can get damaged during shipping or delivery or while they're being moved around on the job site. Edges or locking mechanisms can be chipped or broken. You can also have planks that have visual defects that need to be pulled out and replaced after you notice them once the floor is installed. Just take a little bit of time and extra energy to look at what gets installed and call out any bad planks. And those are the most common mistakes that I see and troubleshoot on floating floors all across the country. Hopefully the information here will prevent a costly repair or floating floor replacement. If you have any questions or comments, put those below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.